How's it, guys? Junaid here. Today's video is going to be based on a question that I've been getting a lot over the past few years. So I've decided to do a video on answering this question to the best of my ability. The question is basically on that I get is on what are conditions that you look for when you want to target summer flatfish. Now, there's no direct answer for this, but there are certain guidelines that I use, which I'm going to share with you today, as to what I look for when we target flatfish in the KZN coastline. So I've written down 12 points here as to what I look for exactly. So I'm going to share this with you. Firstly, the first point is on this. Of course, varies from place to place. So what you'd look for in KZN and compared to what you look for in Western Cape or Eastern Cape, and what you look for in conditions in Namibia will all vary. This matters on a lot of different things. So what I'm going to share with you today is basically what we look for in the KZN North Coast and Zululand kind of areas. So what I say here might not necessarily work in other areas due to many different kinds of factors. Like if you look at the Mozambican current that we receive in the north coast of KZN and Zululand, is different from the currents that they receive in more towards the southern part of South Africa, like Western Cape and Eastern Cape, because they receive more of the Benguela current. So what I say here varies from place to place, and it targets more specifically the KZN coastline. The second point I'm going to talk on is the different applications we use to look for weather. Now, there's many different applications we use to get weather. I personally have been using the Wind Guru light, which is available on the Play Store for Android users. So this application works for me. There's other applications like Wind Finder and there's Windy, but I haven't used those. I found that Wind Guru light works, is accurate, and you must know how to analyze this also. So I basically have that Wind Guru, and I have a tide application which tells me the tides of whether it's a spring tide, a neap tide, and the times of the tide, etc. So applications are very important, and knowing how to use this application, because they've got many different technical aspects in that application that you'll use to find the best weather condition, because the best weather condition produces the best fish. Right, that's the second point. The third point that I'm going to talk on is on these are merely guidelines. You might have a different opinion to what I say, but this is merely, I'm doing these videos to develop anglers to try and give people information who want to learn. So this is just something that I have gathered over the years of my angling, probably now going over 20 years or so. I've gathered this information, and I want to help guys who wanting to learn, who wanting to build their knowledge in the sport. So this is my opinion, and if you disagree with what I'm saying, please leave your comment below, and maybe I can learn something from it also. So this is basically my opinion and what I've gathered over the years. So number 4, a very, very important factor when looking for the summer flatfish is the wind direction. So basically, the fish in our coastline, our KZN coastline, love the northeasterly wind. It's actually a north wind that blows, but how it comes onto our coast, because of how it's geographically shaped, it's a northeasterly wind. So basically what this does is we usually get this more in the summer months compared to winter months. We get this called a northeasterly wind, and after probably 2 or 3 days of strong blowing of the northeasterly wind, you find the fish going into a feeding frenzy. There's various different reasons for this. which I'll come to into points later. But the northeasterly wind is the wind you look for. Now, there are certain winds in our coastline that put the fish off the bite, namely the southeasterly wind. The southeasterly wind just has an effect on the ocean, and you hardly even get peckers around. So, if there's a southeasterly wind, you rather just wait for that northeasterly wind if that's what you want to target. So, the northeasterly wind is the wind direction that you look for when you're targeting these non-edibles like your sandies, your reggies, your honeys, your brown skates, and etc. So look for the northeasterly winds, and it must blow hard for a few days before you actually get it. A lot of guys will say the northeasterly is blowing, but it doesn't blow hard enough for it to make a difference. So usually what exactly this does is, the north wind comes from the north, because wind blows from the direction it starts blowing from. So what that does is it brings the Mozambican current that is from the north, and it brings it closer to the shore. So with that comes a lot of more oxygen and a lot of more nutrients in that water that allow fish to go into that feeding frenzy. So look for that northeasterly winds. Number 5 is your wave period. Your wave period is very, very important. It's usually beneath your, if you look at your wave direction, your wave height, and you look at your, beneath it is your wave, your wind period. So if you look at the wind period, this usually has to do with something we call a surge, or the action of water that's beneath the ocean. Usually if your wind period is above 8, it's going to 9, 10, 11, you'll find that there's some waves crashing, you'll find some surge, some undercurrent. It brings about disturbances which fish don't usually like to feed in this kind of conditions. So ultimately, in my opinion, I like it when it's on 8. There's a slight bit of movement, there's a bit of action which is good. When it goes below 8, like 5 or 6, you can throw your sinker and you'll feel it's still, and usually the fish don't really like that. When it's either too high or too low, it's not exactly good. So the next point is, I haven't added here, but I'm just going to say it, is the wave height. Now you usually have a wave height that tells you how large the waves are going to be. Now this is not a literal way of saying, if you look at your wave height, if you look at it is 1.2, you can't take a ruler and say this is 1.2 meters, this is how. No, it doesn't work like that. These applications are getting on an average the size of waves over time. So if you look at it, if you look at a sea like 1.1 meter, which is an extremely calm sea, you don't find much drift, which is excellent for fishing conditions, compared to something like a 3.1 or 3.2 or 4 to 5 meters wave height, which is the waves are much larger and higher, so the fish don't usually like that. My personal best for summer fishing, I like between a 1.8 to 2.2 meter wave height after a few days of northeasterly. I found in a sea that is slightly larger, you get your bigger fish coming to feed. So I like a slightly bigger sea compared to when it's a very flat sea, which can also be good, but you don't usually get a lot of fish feeding, because the chances of them getting attacked in that very flat sea is also high. Number 6 I'm moving on into is wind speed. Wind speed is very, very important, because you must look at usually in your wind speed, in your applications like Wind Guru, you have two parts, the wind speed and the wind gust. Now if both are high, usually the wind blows continuously and hard, it's hard to fish. But if it's like on 15 to 20 knots or something like that, it's usually calm. But you'll see colors. If it goes to purple and red and stuff, it's usually very uncomfortable. The wind is strong compared to something when it's like in a green, that's in your wind guru, then it's fishable and much better. But yeah, just look at the wind speed and you must know how fast the wind will be blowing in that also. Number 7, we're going into previous and the following days conditions. Now sea just doesn't change overnight. It has a transition into many factors that it blows in. If you look at the conditions from a day before, if the sea is like very rough, or it's very violent or strong, if you fish the next day it's still settling, then the undercurrent might still be there, and fishing might not be good. So sometimes it just needs a couple of days to settle, and then you get a fish. Also look at following days, what conditions are looking on the following days, because the following days are important, because sometimes when a big storm approaches, the following day the fish feed just before that, which we're going to come to just to our next point just now. So observe your days, choose your days correctly as to when you want to fish, because some days you might not be able to fish every day, but choose your best days to fish. Look at before and after, and look at which days are best, and make your best during that time. Point number 8, we're moving on into barometric pressure. Barometric pressure plays a role. It's like, from my opinion, like the sun that hits onto the ocean, and it has effect onto the pressure, and the fish can sense this. So you get applications also barometric pressure to look at the pressure, whether it's dropping or rising. The summer flatfish like a drastic drop in pressure. They feed in that. Now this can be sometimes before a west comes, during a west comes, or after a west comes. You got to observe those pressures. Sometimes the west blows and guys just go off the beach. As they're walking off the beach, the fish just come onto the bite. So observe when the pressure is dropping. If your pressure drops under 1000, that is excellent for flatfish. Fish feed in that type and that. But if your pressure is quite high, 102 or 102.5, etc., the fish don't like that, because it's high. Usually comes with a south wind. So look for the drastic drop in barometric pressure, and you can connect some fish. Point number 9 is on the water color. Now you get two different types of water colors that in our KZN coastline. One that affects the ocean color is the water that comes from the river mouths, and the discolored water comes from a continuously blowing northeasterly wind direction, which brings churn after 2 or 3 days, and it discolors the water. So be careful about this. The summer fish bite in both, so you gotta be observing it and knowing that color moves also with the wind direction. So if it's a northerly wind, you're gonna look at the wind blows from the left to the right on our coast. So you're obviously going to fish more into river mouths, south of the river mouths. So because that direction of water moves with the current, so be wary of that. The fish usually like that color. The sandies, the raggies love that color. It comes with a lot of nutrients, but be careful which rivers open also. Some rivers are not that rich into nutrients. Like look at our Tugela river, is very strong with resources, and when that river opens and then the wind blows and the river color comes in, the fish come with it. Number 10 is that you look for conditions is banks and depth of water. Now if you look at this giant guitar fish, the sand sharks, their characteristics, they feed along the banks. So if you look at knowing where to fish is very important, but we're talking today about conditions. Sea conditions also create certain structures, certain gutters, certain holes. So you're going to fish into, if you can, at the back of that bank. You must be able to identify where the sand sharks feed. They feed behind those banks. So you must be able to throw your bait behind those banks and choose where you're going to fish correctly. So it's very important as to where you put your bait, because there's thousands of kilometers of offshore. Those summer fish feed in certain places because of they feel comfortable in those areas, feeding behind the banks, feeding on a lot of mollusks, etc. Number 11, which is probably the most important aspect of all here, is the water temperature. The water temperature plays a massive role in you getting onto fish or not. When the water is warm, you don't get bites. Probably 23, 24, 25 degrees, the fish absolutely don't like that. When water temperature drops, if you're looking at from 21, 20, 19, that kind of temperature, and water is ice cold, the fish love it. There's a lot of oxygen. They're comfortable in that kind. You get different species of fish. You get prawns, you get stumpies, you get kingfish, you get all different kinds of fish in that cold water. So look for that cold water. Often in competition, we put guys at different spots and they observe the temperature. If you look at guys in three different spots, the guy in the coldest water will get the fish. Sometimes you get patches of cold water coming in, just like the diamonds come in that cold water, and you collide the fish. So observe, the colder the water, the better for you if you want to target these bigger non-edibles. The last thing I'm going to talk about is your casting, where you're going to cast your bait. So if you know that you can cast your bait behind that bank, fish in that bank. But if you look at stuff like rips that are going out, or you look at troughs, or you look at gutters, you must know where you can put your bait size, and where you're going to cast it into the trough, or whether you're going to cast it behind or before. Try all different things and you can see what works best. So anglers, these are some of the points that I use for when I look for fishing conditions that are suiting us best. I hope you learned something from this video. Yeah, let me know more about what you'll want advice I can talk about. It's all about development in a sport. It's all about helping the next angler and seeing everybody achieve their fishing goals. Thank you very much, and yeah, tight lines to all anglers.